I always refer to this story. Robert and I were in Tokyo not too long ago, a couple years back, and we were amongst, Charlie, you'll appreciate this, so we were amongst people at a dinner, and some people sometimes feel the need to lecture you about anything from religion to politics, right? And all I really wanted was a sake and a couple of pieces of sushi. Well, finally this one gentleman started really hitting on him pretty good, and he used to work for the gentleman. And so finally Charlie had exploded and I went crazy, and I gave the guy about a half-hour lecture on many of the books that you gave me. So, and unfortunately for Robert, he had a new career to choose. But the point is, we built a great relationship and a wonderful friendship out of that dinner in Tokyo. This is one of the finest people in the business, and there are many, obviously, that do these things. But Robert Palmer, he's the chief analyst for BPO research. He's got a wonderful perspective on the industry. And if you don't mind, I'd like you to ask you to welcome him to the stage. So.
All right, thank you. Wow. I have known Mike for a long time, and I consider our friendship to be more important to me than our business relationship for sure. But and I've known Mike to have a lot of talents, but I tell you, I'm impressed by the way you introduce speakers. It's not an easy thing to do sometimes, and you do a great job at it. So I don't know what you guys think, but the guy is just excellent at bringing people to the stage. So I think when Mike and Jenna asked me to come and chat briefly, the idea was kind of give a quick overview about what we see happening in the solutions space, kind of as it relates to driving the industry forward, as it relates to where we see things happen in terms of transformation, which is an overused word. But I do agree with Mike. I do think that events like this, and this event in particular, go a long way towards helping to push our industry forward. And we can get some of the brightest minds in the industry in the same room, and we can have open dialogue about what's happening and really educate ourselves and learn from that. I think that's really important. I was thinking, I got started in the printing industry about 25 years ago on the OEM side, and did that for about 10 years. And then when I moved to market research, I went to work for Lyra as managing editor of the Hard Copy Observer. And for 6 years, I put that publication out. Any observer readers in the audience here? I don't know if there are any, but I was very proud of my work on the Observer. It was widely recognized as kind of the Bible of the industry. I put my heart and soul into it. On a monthly basis, I produced 60 some odd pages on average, usually about 25 to 30,000 words a month, all on the topic of printing and what's driving our industry. And but the interesting thing was, when my family and friends would ask me, "What do you do for a living?" I would take an Observer and give it to them and say, I publish this newsletter. And invariably they would look at it and start to read, and they'd get this puzzled look, and they'd say, "Who in the world would ever read this?" Well, because it just didn't make any sense to them. And fast forward to today, and when I'm asked the same question, I go through kind of the same spiel, and the question I get is, how can you write about printing for 25 years? How much more can there be to say about this industry? But my opinion is that this is still a very vibrant and viable industry. It's changing for sure, but I think what is going to help us adapt to those changes and drive through and forward with those changes is you guys here and the channel, because that's what has always made this industry vibrant. So we'll talk a little bit. I don't need to go through that. In typical analyst fashion, Mike gave me 30 minutes. I have about 25 slides, which is impossible to do. So I'm going to move quickly through some of these. But when we talk about being in transition, what I like to do is, we are in transition. We are in the midst of transformation, but that's not new. Our industry has gone through multiple levels of transformation. And when you look at the kind of the initial stages early on in the market, it's very much hardware driven, very much product centric, right? The market was driven by changes that were occurring on the product side. That in turn, forced new technology out in the marketplace, and that's what drove new decisions to kind of push our market forward. But as products began to mature, and as it became more and more difficult to kind of differentiate yourself based on your hardware, we began to transition, and we transitioned, out of hardware, which was measured really on unit share and market share, right, into a pages-driven business, right, where we focus more on shifting away from hardware and pages that we could capture, and not just pages, but high value pages where there was higher margin, or pages under contract, which is when we kind of made the first sort of beginning steps into managed print services. But in that stage of the market, your success was measured by page share, right? And now we're changing again, right? We're moving out of that, and we're moving more into a services, solutions-led business. This is where we're bringing in more advanced capabilities around NPS, and where it's sort of leveraging that insight capability to adjacent business opportunities, if you will. But what we're doing now is we're measuring success less on pages or hardware or share, but now on customer share and wallet share, right? And I think the point is that we've always been an industry in transition, but I think the interesting thing to think about is in previous times, those transitions were really driven by the OEMs and their channel, right? We as the industry kind of fostered those changes along because we needed to in order to be more profitable, in order to be more successful, in order to be sustainable. But this current transition is really being driven by the customer, right? The customer is actually pulling us along to where we have to go. And I think that's kind of an important distinction to make when you look at what's happening in the market. So when I think about solutions, and I try to think about, okay, what's happening on the solution side is really important. It's really kind of changing the way we're working. And I wanted to tie that back to some of the higher level macro trends that are happening in the business. And one of those, of course, is this migration from A3 to A4, right? This is an ongoing thing that's been happening, since the convergence of the copier and printer space. It really gained momentum when we started looking more at managed print, and we started looking at trying to push the devices out closer to the user. That sort of helped manifest that transition even farther. But when you look at what's happening with that migration, and you look at how solutions play a role in that, we're now starting to see the OEMs really start to enable their A4 work group class products to run their solutions platforms, right? So now A4 is not just looked at as an alternative to A3, a cheaper, more cost-effective, better price performance kind of device against A3. It is now a fully functional solutions-enabled device that's going out into the network and is going to support that transition, right? When you look at another trend that's very important in our industry, which is, the focus on, excuse me, the focus on verticalizing your sales force, targeting vertical markets, that's very important to what's happening to our business right now. And obviously there are a lot of elements there where solutions plays a vital role. I mean, the fact is you cannot be an expert in vertical markets if you don't have expertise in solutions that specifically address those vertical markets, right? So solutions play absolutely a vital role there. And then you look at this last one, the changing workforce, and this is one where, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, but so many have already talked about it, maybe I don't need to, so I might go through it quickly. But, a number of things happening around the changing dynamics of the workforce, the shift to mobility, the shift to the cloud, the transition from the traditional kind of paper-based workflow to digital or mobile workflows. And all of that, from our industry perspective, will, in order for us to participate in that transition and to really help drive it, services and solutions, I should say, are really going to play a strong role in that capability. So I went and, dug up a few statistics just to kind of highlight what's going on. And in what we're following, we're not looking at the world anymore in terms of content or in terms of documents and document management. It's really now all about information. And there are so many statistics you can go and pull to say that the biggest challenges that most companies face today is just how do we get, how do we manage our information? How do we leverage that information in meaningful ways? How can we extract portions of it or all of it and port it to various areas of our business? That's an area of business where most businesses today are really struggling. And you can just look at some of these statistics to see how important that is. And I think another element that's important to me, as we've done some of our research, is to try and understand what the impact is of the shift to mobility and the mobile worker. And the interesting thing is when you look at studies on this still, there's kind of an old view of what a mobile worker is that still kind of perpetuates a lot of the research around this. And that you hear terms like road warriors and remote-based workers to refer to a mobile worker. But the reality is that all of us are mobile workers. We all are now. I mean, if you're using a mobile device to access content in any way, you're a mobile knowledge worker, right? So I think the point that we're trying to make there as we start to really try and study this more closely is that we're not looking at the mobile worker any longer as a separate demographic. It's just who we all are. That's who we are and how we function. And then when you add to that the component of technology, sort of driving changes in business, and you look at the way mobile devices are sort of impacting business and how those are coming in. You can just look at tablets as a perfect example. I mean, Forrester, I think, is predicting by 2016 to grow from 56 million to 381 million units, and about 18% of those purchased by business. So if you extrapolate those numbers, by 2016, we'll have more devices that are being brought into by businesses alone than we have currently being purchased in 2011. So that's fairly substantial. So the point of all of this is just that the role of print, of course, is changing. And there's so much discussion about print. Is print dying? Is print going away? What's happening to print? You've heard a lot in the panels and discussion. I don't believe that print goes away, but I do believe that print is changing. And if you look at the current document life cycle, and you look at everything that can be done, all of these things can be accomplished with a mobile device running a cloud-based solution, right? You can create content, you can share content, you can distribute it, you can print it, you can move it around, you can do everything you want. So print really can't be viewed any longer as kind of a separate or standalone business function. Historically, print's kind of been viewed as an important process, but not an integrated business function. And going forward, it has to be an integrated business function. And that's where solutions, I think, really play a key role. And one of the things that we talk to end users about, so I spend a lot of my time doing various events with end user groups, kind of getting feedback from them, understanding what they're dealing with, what their top 5 priorities are, what they're looking at in the transition from their business model, whether it's moving out of one area into another. So one of the things that constantly comes up as one of the significant business challenges is this transition from paper to digital. And when you look at what is happening in a lot of businesses today, we have this very antiquated paper-based workflow that's in some ways kind of like a digital to analog to digital process, right? You create content, you may send that content out to be printed, but then that content also gets distributed, and in some cases after it's distributed, it's modified in some way, and it may have to be scanned back into the system, or it may have to be reprinted, could be stored. It's a very inefficient workflow, and it's ripe with opportunities to create problems. And this is a challenge for many businesses today, just trying to figure out how to deal with this migration from paper to digital and the conversion from paper to digital. And one of the biggest problems is that if you think about the original sort of static environment, right, we created content, whether that was either hard copy content that we were bringing into the system or that was something that was created digitally and then pushed out. You created the content and then you distributed that to wherever you needed it to go. But in the digital ecosystem, there's no real start or stop point for content anymore, right? You can create content in the cloud and then ship that over to the desktop, or you could create content from a mobile device, and some of that needs to be shared digitally, some of that needs to be shared in hard copy form. So there's no start and stop point. And so managing that and controlling that is really critical. And that's why we see businesses really kind of focusing on these 4 key areas: this access to content, maintaining content integrity and security. Those are kind of the main elements that businesses are kind of dealing with now as they look at this transition to digital. So what does this all mean when we start thinking about, okay, what are we doing from a solutions perspective to kind of address these challenges, right? And what we're seeing is that on the OEM side, their solution strategies are evolving. So they're no longer talking about document management. They're more talking about information and content management, right? Because they're not just looking at managing the documents that move throughout the enterprise. They're managing all content. They're shifting their focus or the conversation away from scan or capture and more into the paper to digital conversion, right? They're looking, not talking just about document workflow, but they're talking about workflow automation and process optimization and process improvement. And they're moving away from print management and talking more about intelligent print management, which has an extra added layer. And within all of those, there are 3 key issues. That is that you have to be able to support mobility and mobile workflows. cloud-based services, and then data analytics. And I thought that Doug did a great job talking about the big ass buzzword of data analytics and big data. And I think in our industry, I think Kevin was talking about inflection points, and for me, I think we are really at an inflection point as it relates to data analytics within our industry, and not just business intelligence, but predictive analytics and the ability to leverage the data that we're collecting and to be more meaningful partners with our customers. And what do I mean by that? I think what I mean by that is as we've transitioned from a transactional kind of business to a services-led business, you've turned these devices into managed assets, right? So now we have devices out in the field under contract that are collecting data, and we're going to be able to leverage that data in new meaningful ways. But there has to be platforms and systems in place in order to do that. And so what you see now, what you see the OEMs doing from a hardware perspective, is they're sort of migrating their solutions strategy from a proprietary platform that really is designed to enable external applications that can help you get into new opportunities and drive new volume, more to open platforms that are designed for integrating all the solutions together, right? It's sort of a strategic thing that we're watching. So this kind of gives you a better idea of what I'm talking about. We see now a lot of OEMs, and this is just a couple examples. It's not by any means meant to represent what I think are the best in class or what I think